Hello, everyone. Wrathofautumn here on wrathswackyworld.com. For this video, I'm going to be doing something different. This video is a critical analysis of a certain webcomic that has haunted me for years, and nominated as one of the best to have ever been written. The name of the comic is called Black Tapestries by Jackal. Black Tapestries was a comic that started around the year 2002 and ran for a good 6 years. Due to some personal issues with the original format, however, Jackal has decided to do a relaunch of the series, but no progress has been made on it since February of this year. The aspect behind it is of a drifter by the name of Lorelei, who has one of the most messed up backstories of any fantasy character I've read. She was formerly human until a job set up by an order of mages, simply called the Order, sent her to Therapos, where her life changed forever. Upon entering the town, she was transformed into an anthropomorphic gray fox, which is part of a race of animal people known collectively as the Caitiff. Later cursed by the leader of the town as an immortal werefox for attempted murder, the rest of the comic is pretty much Lorelei embarking on a larg and hard road coping with her immortality, observing it through the perspectives of both human and Caitiff factions, seeing just how pointless the conflicts of prejudice was. At least, that's how it might have worked in theory. I saw it as a premature version of the film District 9, where we see the perspective through the antagonists. We'll talk about that later in this video. Our purpose here is to do a critical analysis of the webcomic as it was before the relaunching, a reflection on the strengths and weaknesses of the comic, and an overall overview of the comic as a whole. Something to keep in mind here that most of this is based on my observations of the webcomic. There is nothing based entirely on facts, and I have no real interest in citing all of my sources like a blogger. However, I personally feel some of the issues I bring up here are rather valid. Many people, especially in the fur fandom, believe this to be one of the greatest comics ever made. I'd say that comment is rather overrated, as there are plenty of problems I feel like I ought to bring up. You're free to state your comments about how you feel about the rant at the bottom of the video, but just keep in mind this is largely just my opinion. For those of you who are rather new to the comic, the link is here. I'll go on and wait a little while while you read that. Okay, so let's begin the discussion of Black Tapestries by Jackal. Where do I begin with this character? Her family was murdered in an assassination set up by the Order themselves. She was raised into adulthood by thieves. She spends the majority of her time brooding until the aforementioned job, cursed by the leader of Therapos, made immortal after attempting suicide, skinned alive, tortured, raped, and stalked by an obsessed fox caitiff. Lorelei's life is purely full of suckage. But does this really grant the character sympathy or even make her a badass? Well, yes and no. Lorelei can be sympathetic in her more miserable moments, such as in issue 4 when Isaac transforms her adopted family into feral jackals, and she even has her moments of pure awesome. For the most part, you really just want to bitch slap her. Lorelei as a character is extremely angsty with a lot of pented rage. Rarely does she ever cope with situations when things get dicey, and often broods or runs away from the issues. Her friends are few in between, and she makes more enemies than allies. Even potential allies come to hate her because she betrays them quickly, like Jack in issue 3 and the Caitiff gladiators in issue 6. So while her life is terrible, she doesn't really give us a reason to feel sorry for her or cheer her on. It's like trying to cheer up a person with severe depression. It makes you want to tear your hair out. The worst aspect of Lorelei, aside from being rather unlikable, is the lack of character development. There are a dozen plot devices and chances introduced in the comic that would have made the comic very interesting. Unfortunately, however, none of these ever go anywhere, either because they're glanced at or there's always an excuse or some plot twist that either levels Lorelei's character out or makes her even worse. I read the comics as long as I did in the hopes that Lorelei would eventually wise up and become something more three-dimensional. To my greatest sadness, though, I'm sorry to say that Lorelei was a rather hopelessly annoying anti-heroine. Isaac Devane was once the head of the Order before Teleris. He was a Caitiff sympathizer who started his time pulling innocent tricks on the Order to save the Caitiff who were beaten relentlessly. Eventually, he fell in love with a fox Caitiff and, to keep it secret, changed her into a human to be his wife. When the Order got smart, they murdered her and stripped him of his rank, declaring him an enemy of humanity. Enraged, Isaac fled to a town called Therapos, transforming it into a Caitiff sanctuary, while also searching for the reincarnation of his dead wife, whom he eventually became convinced was Lorelei. You may have noticed I placed a big question mark over Isaac Devane's name. My reason for it is that I actually like Isaac. He's a compelling character who helps to move the story forward. He's hardly anything one would call evil, if not somewhat obsessed. It's argued that he's as bad as the members of the Order who mistreat prisoners, but Isaac is more merciful to his enemies than they are. We'll talk more about that later. Isaac spared Lorelei's life when he could have let her die for murdering her, not to mention aided her adopted sister, even after she became a feral wolf. He sacrifices his sister at one point to save his own son, showing that Isaac, though having issues of his own, is a far more three-dimensional, even enjoyable character than Lorelei. And that's really sad when your villains are far more interesting than your heroes are. Many of the side characters come and go, so I'll be as brief as I can with these guys. There's little to say since many are so glanced over or show up briefly. We'll start with Dane. Dane is Lorelei's unofficial love interest, and is possibly the only real friend that Lorelei has. Even though after so many years he didn't recognize Lorelei in her fox form, following that he defended her to the bitter end. I like Dane, but Dane has moments of being rather preachy to Lorelei. To be fair though, Dane does it because he actually likes Lorelei, and yet can never seem to win her over to stick with him. When Lorelei and someone else, I forget her name, from our reality swap bodies, Dane takes full advantage of the situation and finally is given a chance to have what he never could with Lorelei. And the change to him seems like an improvement. Thus, Dane to me is a pretty well-balanced character. But other than that, he's not really my favorite. Tristan Devane was a disappointment as a character. He started off as one of the more ideally gray characters of the series, but being with Lorelei, eventually dropped into her level. Think about it. When his old life was destroyed due to the nature of Lorelei's existence, the grief keeps making him angrier and angrier, and Lorelei, though she's trying to help him, she starts to suspect she created a monster. The final stage of the transformation is when he became brainwashed, and he lost all sympathy for the Caitiff and became a pro-human member of the Order. At this point, Tristan is a major ass, destroying any hopes you could think could benefit him. And it's really sad to see a character who starts off very strongly suddenly plummet to something very bad. Shadwin, the adopted sister of Lorelei, had a comic of her own for a little while, but the comic went nowhere as far as I know. I've never actually looked at it for a while, so maybe some stuff has been added. She starts off as in issue 4, she starts off as an enjoyable wise ass, but eventually warms up to helping Lorelei to the bitter end She was far kinder to Lorelei than her own dad, and even the other members of the Highwaymen. Isaac would have spared her the fate of the rest of the adopted family when they got changed to jackals, but Shadwin retaliated as any person would, trying to kill Isaac. She's probably one of my favorite characters in the series. While she was still, for the most part, a red wolf, her time as an animal actually helped her perceive the world of Caitiff and humans as the author was trying to show us, causing her to respect the power of the Caitiff while feeling more attached to the traditions and prejudices of her own people. This means that though we never did see much of what she does, Shadwin had more character development than her sister did. Finally, we have Jack, or the Jackal. His family was murdered in a rather sophisticated setup by the Order, with Jack winding up having to kill his own wife and himself, being cursed as a werewolf. To his own horror, he discovers that he murders his own son while a monster. Though the Order did this to him, they promised to undo the horrors inflicted on him in exchange for the return of Lorelei. Jackal was a badass in the story of Black Tapestries, another tortured soul, and yet he still remained an honorable character enough to help those he himself wronged in the past. The only difference was that Jack was more respectful of his deals than Lorelei was. So when Lorelei betrays him to the Order, he doesn't really take it lightly. He's tortured to the point of having his soul ripped out and becoming some kind of a demon, and it also gives him the ability to art. Once he's free, he proceeds to seek out Lorelei for his revenge. The issue with the return of Jack is just absolutely delicious. We all expected this when we read this series, and my god, seeing Jack enjoy every moment cutting pictures into Lorelei's body just made me fuzzy all over. Of course, Isaac interferes to save his lover's life, but even that fight is plain awesome. So there you have it, all the characters discussed. Now we'll talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the comic.